Books worth hearing. Roy Mills, The Soul's Remembrance. Earth is not our home. Chapter 3, Trail of Tears. After my birth, I knew for sure that I wasn't in heaven anymore. In heaven, I had been used to living in a spiritual body and being able to move freely and easily. But after my physical birth, I felt like I was wearing a jacket made of lead. My arms and legs were so heavy I could hardly lift them. I had no idea how my physical body was supposed to work. This wasn't part of my pre-birth training. My body was so uncoordinated that every time I wanted to move, it seemed like my spirit arms went one way and my physical arms went the other. If I wanted to take hold of something, I saw my spirit hand, which was bright and shone with a golden tint, just reach out and try to grab the object, while my physical hand played catch-up. It was very frustrating, and I had an awful time getting my two selves coordinated. It took several months before both bodies, physical and spiritual, started working together as one. Even though I hadn't learned to control my body or speak, I did understand what people were saying and doing. The only time I got confused was when they spoke baby talk to me. Goo goo, gaga, made no sense at all, and I would laugh when they made those sounds because they sounded so silly. Because my spirit had a heavenly knowledge, I often knew what people were going to say or do before it actually happened. When my mother took me to various places, I sometimes recognized them, even though I was seeing them for the first time in my earthly body. And I recognized a lot of people the first time I saw them, because I had met them in heaven before I was born. It wasn't their physical faces that I knew, but their spirits. I believe infants can recognize a person's spirit when they see it, because the child's ties with heaven are still strong so soon after being born. But before long, most children forget that they are mighty spirit beings who came from heaven. That forgetfulness is part of God's plan, because if we could keep talking to angels and remembering heaven every waking moment, we would limit the earthly experiences we are meant to have by constantly choosing what is right. And so much of what we must learn and experience comes from making the wrong choice and suffering because of it. We must have the innocence and experience of childhood in order to gain knowledge and grow. And sometimes those experiences are painful. My daddy left before I was born. Mama and I lived in a 2-bedroom farmhouse in southern Georgia with Mama's parents and 5 of my aunts and uncles. We were dirt poor, and it was a hard life. My mother had grown up always having to do without, and she was tired of being hungry and of wearing hand-me-downs that were already old when she got them. She was young and pretty, and she just wanted out. One day, she got her chance. Mama had fallen in love with another man. His name was Lee. He was good-looking and had money besides, and he helped Mama forget my real daddy. He asked her to marry him, and she accepted, but he told her he didn't want to raise another man's son, and that he wouldn't marry her until she gave me away or found another place for me to live. I know Mama loved me a lot, but she saw this marriage as a once-in-a-lifetime shot at getting the things she had always dreamed of. Her fiancé had put her in a terrible spot. That night, when we went to bed, she pulled me up close and held me all night long. Mama had made up her mind, and the next day she took me to find a new home. We visited many strange houses the following day, and it didn't take me long to understand what Mama was doing. As we walked up to the door of a little clapboard house I had never seen before, I pleaded, "Please, Mama, don't give me away. Don't leave me. I don't want to stay here. I'll be a good boy, I promise." My mother paid me no mind and dragged me to the front door of the unfamiliar house. "Hush up," was all she said. I was 4 years old then, but each time I recall this, it seems like it was just yesterday, and yesterday's nightmare. When the lady of the house came to the door, Mama made some small talk before getting around to telling the woman that she was trying to find me a home. "Why are you giving your child away?" the woman asked. "I'm too poor to feed him," Mama answered. She didn't mention anything about getting married and just kept talking about one thing and then another, trying to convince the woman to take me. Mama had a problem with talking too much and not paying attention to what she was saying. She must have run her mouth a bit too much again, because the lady listened patiently for a while and then got very upset. She flapped her arms at Mama and shouted, "You should be ashamed of yourself, trying to give your boy away like he was a dog or something. Get out! I want you off my property." My mother was mad, but she didn't talk back to the woman. She just grabbed my hand and headed back to the road, mumbling to herself as she pulled me along behind her. The day wore on, and I got real tired. We came to another house where a nice woman answered and let us in. She took a liking to me right off, smiling and paying me compliments. Mama started talking to the woman, and I sat in a chair and fell fast asleep. I don't know how long I was asleep when suddenly I heard a voice. "Wake up! Right now!" I opened my eyes quickly and noticed that Mama had gotten up to leave. I knew I had been warned by an angel that Mama had intended to leave me there and just slip out quietly. At every door I heard a voice in my mind telling me, "Resist." I did as I was told because I always obey when the angels talk to me, but it wasn't difficult to obey that particular command. I didn't want to live with anyone else. So each door was another failure, and that was fine by me. I don't know how many miles we walked and hitchhiked that day, but it was a lot. We went from house to house, traveling hot, dusty, and unfamiliar back roads. On that bad day, the worst day of my life, all I saw were strangers, because Mama didn't want to run into anyone she knew. But even perfect strangers yelled at her and slammed doors in her face. Still, she was determined to find someone who was willing to take me, and we kept walking up the paths to distant doors, one after another. I was so upset that I cried uncontrollably most of the time. I must have left a trail of tears on those dusty roads. But then, late in the day, I suddenly had a powerful vision of déjà vu. I realized I had seen these roads and houses and strangers before. I had been shown this day's events already, when I was being prepared in heaven for my earthly life. Often, a memory comes drifting back into my mind like a feather caught in a summer breeze. Other times, a face, a voice, a word, almost anything will suddenly trigger a remembrance, like Mama dragging me down that dusty road that day. Remembering made me feel a little better, but not much. I loved my mother, and I was scared to think about living without her. Luckily, no one seemed to want to break up a family, and we headed back to Grandmama's house, still together at the end of the day. I was physically tired, but happy inside that we would still be a family, but for Mama, it was a disaster. When Grandmama asked where she had been, my mother was so worn out and bothered that she just told her the truth. She didn't even think before saying, "I've been trying to give Roy away." My grandmother came apart at the seams. "Trying to give him away?" she yelled at the top of her voice. "What do you mean? You were trying to give him away? Have you gone slam-damn crazy? I ought to beat you within an inch of your life for even thinking of doing such a thing, much less trying to do it. You'd have to be as low down as a dog to try to give away your own son away." I had never seen Grandmama so mad in all my life. She stared at Mama with a look that said the matter was settled, and declared, "No grandson of mine is going to be given away to nobody as long as I am alive." But the matter wasn't settled as far as Mama was concerned. She started yelling back at Grandmama, and before long there was a royal fuss brewing. Usually it upset me to hear people argue, but this was one fuss I didn't mind at all. I hoped it would make Mama come to her senses, but it only made her more determined than ever. Over the next few days, they had a lot of heated arguments about me, and my grandmama put a lot of pressure on Mama to take me with her when she married her fiancé, Lee. In the meantime, Mama kept going out with him every night. That worried me a little, but I always knew she would come back to me before morning, and it reassured me each morning when I awoke and found Mama lying next to me on our bed. One day, Mama got up earlier than usual and washed and rolled her hair. I sat and watched her fix herself up, like I always did. She was meticulous about everything, especially her makeup, and I enjoyed watching her transform from just Mama into a beautiful woman right before my eyes. We always played a little game as she got ready. She would call me her boyfriend, and I would call her my girlfriend. It made me feel extra special. After Mama's recent attempt to give me away, it meant even more to me to play our special game. I couldn't help but think that maybe she had changed her mind and decided to take me with her when she married Lee. It was strange that she was fixing herself up so early, but I didn't think much of it. And it was even more odd when Lee picked her up in the middle of the day instead of the evening. But I still didn't give it much thought. Just before he came, Grandmama took Mama to the back room, and I could hear them arguing again, even though I could tell they were trying to keep their voices down. But by then, these little fusses were common, and I wasn't very concerned. While they argued, Lee pulled up in front of the house and honked the horn. Mama rushed out, stopping just long enough to throw her arms around my neck and give me a fierce hug before she left. But she didn't say a word. She climbed into Lee's car, waved goodbye, and drove away. I stood in the driveway until the car disappeared up the road. Somehow, something had changed, and I stood there for a long time wondering about it. That night I went to sleep thinking Mama would come home and crawl into bed with me like she always did. But the next morning, when I looked over at the other side of the bed, she wasn't there. "Grandmama," I called out. "Where's Mama?" My grandmama came in and sat on the bed next to me. Her face was pale and her eyes moist. "Son, your mama doesn't live here anymore," she told me softly. "She married Lee, and she lives with him now." Grandmama tried to explain why I couldn't live with my mama in her new house, but I was too young to understand. I started crying at the thought of Mama leaving me behind. My grandmama did her best to comfort me, but I couldn't stop. That night I fell asleep to the sound of my own sobs. The next morning, the first thing I did was look over at Mama's side of the bed, hoping she had come back. But there was no one there, and the tears started again. For the next few days, I couldn't stop crying. At night, I would look up into the starry sky and pray that my mother would come back home. My poor grandmama was upset too, and my constant crying only made her feel worse. All she could do was try to comfort me, saying she didn't know how one of her own daughters could turn out so sorry as to abandon her own child. But this was no comfort. I stopped playing in the yard and walking to the swamps. I stopped everything. The only thing I did was wait and watch for Mama, the same way she used to stand in the window and wait and watch for my real daddy to come back after he abandoned her, which he never did. But Mama and I had a special friendship. Like when we played our girlfriend-boyfriend game. I believed Mama would come to her senses, and I prayed constantly that she would come back, even though Daddy never did. About 2 weeks later, a car drove up, and I ran to look outside. It was Mama. My heart started pounding, and tears filled my eyes. But this time, they were tears of joy. I just knew she had come back to me to live with her, come to take me to live with her. I raced outside as fast as my little legs could carry me, and when she picked me up, I thought my heart would burst. I hugged her as hard as I could, not wanting to let go. But she finally put me down, and I took her hand and held it with all my strength. I figured as long as I didn't let go of her, I wouldn't be left behind again. We went inside so Mama could talk to my grandmama. Mama sat down, but after a few minutes, she said she had to go. I was so excited, believing I was leaving with her, and I ran over to Grandmama and gave her a real big hug goodbye. My mother looked at me with surprise. "What are you doing?" she asked. I'm hugging Grandmama goodbye because I'm going to live with you now." "Oh, no, you're not," Mama said. She frowned and shook her head. "You don't live with me anymore. You live with your grandmama now." I was stunned. Her words hit me hard, bringing back all the sadness of the past 2 weeks. My grandmama was furious. "You are as low down as they come, doing this to your poor child," she said in a cracking voice. "Don't come back here anymore, and if you do, it better be to take him home with you." Mama shot out of her chair with an indignant look and headed for the door. I grabbed her hand and held on for all I was worth, but she dragged me behind her like I wasn't even there. I started crying. When we got to the porch steps, she pried me loose and shoved me aside. That was the worst thing, being pushed away by Mama. She got into the car with her new husband, waved once, and left. Still crying, I waved back and kept on waving until they were completely out of sight. Grandmama was crying too, as loud as I was. She took me in her arms and carried me back in the house, where she held me for a long time afterward. Every few weeks, Mama came back, but she never stayed for more than a few minutes. Each time I asked her, "When can I come live with you?" And her answer was always the same, "In a little while," or "maybe someday." Every time she said those things, it broke my heart, because I knew she didn't mean them. Grandmama got mad all over again each time Mama showed up, and their visits always ended with Mama storming off in a rage. Days, weeks, and months passed, and night after night I had the same dream, that I ran away and found Mama's house, that she loved me again, and that we were together like we used to be, just the two of us. It was a wonderful dream, and in the mornings I always looked across the bed to see if Mama truly had come back. My gut would wrench to see the bed empty, and I would start another day by fighting back more tears. This went on for months, and part of me missed the carefree days of playing in the swamp and walking barefoot up the road. I hated standing in the window every day, smelling the sun-warmed paint of the sill and listening to the flies buzz senselessly against the glass. I wanted Mama to come home, but I started to believe she was gone for good, and though I longed for the love Mama and I had shared, my tears came less often. Then one morning I woke up and decided there was just no use trying to get Mama to let me live with her. Deep in my heart I sensed that this was my path, and I could see it more clearly now that the tears were mostly gone. I felt free. The first thing I did was jump out of bed and run to Grandmama. I threw my arms around her neck and hugged her, stepping back so I could see her face. I asked, "If I promise to be a good boy, will you be my Mama?" Grandmama gave me the most loving smile and held out her arms. I jumped into her embrace, and she held me tight. "I would be honored to be your Mama," she answered solemnly, "for as long as we both shall live." Everyone needs someone to call Mama. It doesn't have to be their birth mother, just someone who will love and care for them. To me, mother meant love, and I knew without a doubt that my grandmother loved me. "Would you mind if I called you Mama?" I asked. No sooner had the words left my mouth than she started to cry. I thought I had said something wrong, or maybe asked for too much. "I'm sorry," I said over and over again. "Sorry for what?" Grandmama asked between sobs. "For making you cry." "I'm not crying because you upset me." Now she was smiling and crying at the same time. "I'm crying because I'm so happy. I'm happier now than I have been in a long time." From that day on, I called her Mama. That night, an angel came to me in a dream. She wore a shining robe and glowed with the most wonderful light. "You did the right thing," she said, smiling sweetly, "and you are where you are supposed to be." I was glad to know that I had made the right choice in letting go of my sadness and starting to live and love again. I was where I was supposed to be with Grandmama, my new mama. When I woke up the next morning, I felt at home for the first time in months. I didn't look over to see if my mother was there beside me, and I didn't start the day with tears in my eyes. I was ready to be happy again, and from that time on, my life got a whole lot better. The next time I saw my mother, I called her by her name, Addie. I never felt comfortable calling her anything but Addie again. I figured I should have only one person who was my mama to me, and my wonderful grandmama had promised to fill that spot for as long as we both lived. I believe forgiveness is a part of love, and that love is forgiveness. So because I still loved the woman who gave me birth, I forgave her. The truth is, I don't think I ever really held it against her that she abandoned me. But while I never lost my love for Addie, I never trusted her with my heart again. Those months were hard, and I learned a lot about love and healing and forgiveness. I was fortunate to recall memories from heaven that helped me know I was on the right path. And though the pain of abandonment still crept into my heart, the knowledge I had about my pre-birth life and my visitation from the angel helped me understand that making choices is an important part of every earthly mission, and that growth often comes from our most bitter trials. Chapter 3, Trail of Tears, the end.